Hello and welcome to the Tradeshift Sanctuary in Davos, Switzerland. My name is Travis Bickham and I'm moderating this panel between Christian Lanng, CEO of Tradeshift, and Pernille Hippe Brun, who is an entrepreneur, academic, and board member. We're here live in Davos, Switzerland during the World Economic Forum, where the theme is responsive and responsible leadership. Today's theme is going to be Scandinavian Strengths-Based Leadership. So I want to flip it to you right away, Pernille, and say, what is Scandinavian Strengths-Based Leadership, and how does that apply to what we're talking about this whole week?
Yeah, so strengths-based leadership basically is about creating strengths around everybody's strengths in the company, how to build on them, how to bring them on, how to create energy in the company so that we can keep up the innovation, the imagination, because the world of tomorrow needs people who can actually think out of the box and who can every day turn up with their best strengths and bring it into work. And Scandinavian, why I put that word in front of strengths-based leadership? It's because in Scandinavia we have some core strengths around trust and how inclusion is actually pivotal for us, and we train that a lot in the school system, how inclusion is every day something that we train and that we build on, and how you actually challenge authorities. So strengths-based leadership is also about challenging authorities and questioning what is, and that's what's needed.
That's really interesting. Christian, I know you love to challenge authority. Can you talk a little bit about how you've applied these ideas in your own business at Tradeshift?
I think it's something that came very natural to us. We have 3 Scandinavian co-founders, Danish co-founders in Tradeshift, and I think the way we set out was essentially just to apply the principles that we've grown up with in our own roles as leaders. So I think in the beginning it was not so conscious. I think we had a clear feel for what we wanted, but I think it's all about trust and empathy. Very early on, we had some discussions around how to be a leader. What do you do, for instance, if somebody failed? Like, you pick them up. You don't scold them. You don't say, "Oh, what a bad job you did." You say, "Look, hey, we only got to where we are by falling a lot, for instance." And I think so. That's just part of our DNA. I think the other thing around strength-based and what I really like about Pernille's model is, I know what my weaknesses are. I'm not the most structured guy. Sometimes, I could do a better job of cleaning up after me, all of these things. I can work a lot on that, and I'm maybe gonna get 5-10% better. But I also know what my strengths are, and actually my strengths, the more I lean into my strengths, that can actually push much more, right? So I think sometimes we try so hard to cover for our weaknesses or feel bad that we're not good at something. And I think instead we should really try to, and everything I took from Pernille's model is really lean into our strengths. And I think also as a startup, that's extremely important. You cannot be good at everything. You got to focus your energy, so focus on your strength, because that's where you got to get the biggest return.
So it's a lot about looking into how can you turn something bad into something good? And you can never really turn something bad into something good. You can turn something bad into something not bad, which is not good. And that's what this paradigm is all about. It's about how to take people's biggest strengths and make them compensate for their weaknesses, and then build teams that compensate for each other. Instead of thinking that Christian can do it all or one person can do it all, build up teams so that they cover for each other.
Yeah, that makes sense. That of course challenges the founder hero model that we see all the time in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Which I think leads me into my next question. Scandinavia is of course unique in having a culture that is very much trust-based, very homogenous. What can we as global business people learn from that? And what are the traits we can really pull out of Scandinavia and apply?
Yeah, it's very interesting because in Denmark we have a low power distance, we have a high level of trust. I had a very interesting experience the other day. I had 2 Kenyans visiting my home, and I asked them to go to the neighbor's house and knock on the door and ask for some sugar because we were out of sugar. And they were like, no, we can't just go and knock on the door and ask for sugar. And well, they did, and they came back and they were like, wow, you have this high level of trust in the society that you can go knock on your neighbor's door. And I was like, yeah, of course we do. So I think in Scandinavia we have something inherent that has made this possible, that you can actually challenge the authorities, challenge the CEO, challenge the leaders in the company, or just look at it this way, you give them good suggestions. And so I was really curious to see, will this work in Africa? I've been working in Africa with leaders there for 8 years. And can you bring it global, or is this something exclusive to Scandinavia? But it turned out that it's all about respect for the other human being. And it's about trust, but it's not about blind trust. So you also need to really look at the person and the teams you have and see what can they take on and not give them too much to. So you harness it towards where people are. So it's also situational, but it works in Africa. And they love it because it's about respect for the other people, and it's about not really always fixing yourself, but bringing the best of yourself into work, and people like that all over the world, I guess.
Yeah, but I think it's super interesting when you mix these cultural models, and I think in Tradeshift we got a huge blend. Like we have 43 nationalities in the company, and
wow.
And I think if you look at some of the challenges when we moved from Denmark to the US first, right? We made that transition. I remember having town halls with the whole company and all of the American employees being there, and some Danish employee. I was explaining part of our strategy, and some Danish employee would interrupt me and say, "Christian, I just don't believe that." And like all Americans are just grasping the chair, thinking, "Okay, this guy's out of here tomorrow, right?" But like I'm going, no, why is this just tell? And I think so. I think you get stronger, right? Like in Tradeshift, you say be critical, not cynical. Like challenge the ideas so we get to the right place. So I think there's so much strength also in mixing the models. I think we can learn a lot in Scandinavia, to be frank, about sort of the American confidence and energy. I think so. So I think in this intersection, there's a lot of positive, and I think from actually taking to the other side, like in looking at our customers and the people we are working with. I mean, a lot of the stuff we do as an organization and the software we build is actually about flattening the hierarchy. In the old models, you have thousands and thousands of workers creating, inputs, just putting in data or typing into an SAP system or something else, and nothing comes out, right? It's this huge power pyramid, and then finally at the top, the CFO, he gets a report every month or every quarter. And we sort of try to invert that to say, look, we should trust employees in the front line to make decisions. We should give them the data so they can make a better decision immediately. So I think if you really, have a set of values, it goes all the way to your culture, and it actually goes all the way into your product. And so there's this great saying, right, that your product is the souvenir that your culture leaves behind. Yeah. And I believe that's very true. So everything Pernille is talking about is embedded in that.
But it's you touch on something that I really believe in. It's not about being critical. It's more maybe about being constructive. So when an employee comes up, or a team member, or your colleague, or your leader, or whatever comes up and say, "Oh, this is not going to work," then you try to meet them and ask them, "Oh, so what do you suggest? What would you like to see happening?" So there's this saying about behind every problem there's a frustrated dream. So we're trying to look into that. So when somebody is being critical or criticizing something, really look at them. Oh, maybe they have a point. Listen to what they're saying. So some people misunderstand strengths-based leadership as something where we never talk about what's not going well and what's not working. Well, we're trying to fix problems here. It's all about fixing problems, but it's how you fix it, with what kind of mindset and how do you meet people.
Of course. So speaking of fixing problems, Christian, I know I've seen you speak on the topic of the Fortune 500, and how they can avoid young, more technologically adept companies actually coming in and taking their market share. And your recommendation to them is, of course, moving to future-proof with technology and processes and different thinking. You employ a lot of millennials and young people working in Silicon Valley. Is this a way to future-proof your own workforce?
I think yes, in a way, and I think we got to learn. I think there's a lot of sort of like negative energy around what is millennials in the workplace, and I actually think it's a super positive. I mean, they just work differently, and I think they ask some really important questions, like they don't want to work in a situation where they don't have a meaningful job. That's not something I think bad. I think that's something strong, and I think it's on not just us, but also the big companies to figure out how do we provide meaningful jobs. I think that's something we really got to learn. And we talk a lot about automation also sometimes being bad. I think automating the stuff that is not meaningful, automating the stuff that is not creative, that's not opening the mind, is actually a good thing. But we really also need to think about how we create meaningful jobs for the next generation. And in Tradeshift, obviously, it's all about empowering people, giving the autonomy, and at the same time, of course, trying to coach them a little bit. But I don't know, maybe Pernille, if you have any good tips on strength-based leadership and millennials. I think that a lot of people
I think it's a great fit because it's called the purpose generation for a good reason. They don't want to work just for a big corporation and go to work and be bored every day. You know, no one does. I think also us over 40, we don't either. So strengths-based leadership is about creating an environment of inclusiveness and about creating energy so that you can solve the problems that you face every day. And millennials are going to require that. They're brought up into this world with digitization, with inclusiveness, with direct access to information. So when we talk about also transparency and that you have the right information so that you can make your own decisions, that's something that's required. So the millennials, when they enter an old-fashioned structure with a hierarchy where they have to wait for maybe days before they can make a decision, they're going to be feeling stuck, and they're going to require something else. And I actually think that's a good thing. It's going to challenge the system, but the strengths-based model is maybe providing you with some structure around how you can actually organize your organization so that millennials will fit into that.
Absolutely.
I think that's a great thing. And you know, in 3 years, 70% of the workforce is going to be millennials. So they're going to be the new leaders very, very soon. And a lot of them already are.
I think the point about the power distance you talked about before, like how millennials, they don't like power distance. And I think this is something we've seen up very closely, right? Like in Tradeshift, we actually try to do everything we can to reduce that distance. Every year, we actually bring everybody who started during the last 12 months, so we call it the new generation. We have a dinner, all of the founders with them. Typically, we bring the whole company together. And the message we have for everyone there is very simple. It is, look, you know, you're the new generation in Tradeshift, and you have a very important job, which is to challenge all of our beliefs, to challenge everything, and to ask questions about everything. And don't ever accept like, oh, this is how we always have done things. So I think you can flip this kind of energy that's coming in from the millennial generation to actually to be a positive, to challenge you to move further. Because companies that grow, even startups, we settle into our own dogma, we settle into our own routines. And I think that's like, you know, reducing the power distance is actually enabling you to do that, enabling you to get the feedback, right? But that requires trust.
Yeah. And courage from the leaders, because that's this whole thing about, you know, leaders. It's dopamine thing that you have to, when you give away power, you also lose some dopamine. So it's actually difficult for many leaders to give away some power, and they have to flip it all around and look at it completely differently, because it's not about giving away power. It's about distributing it out in the whole organization so that you as an organization get more powerful. Yeah. So that's why I talk about energy, and it's of course personal energy, but it's also organizational energy. What kind of messages do you send out in the world? What kind of energy do you spread? What is it that people see when they meet Christian and the other leaders in Tradeshift and walk into the office? What kind of energy is there? And I tell you that millennials, they're going to choose their place to work based also on that.
So Christian, how do you harness that? Giving away power, but actually creating more energy?
I actually think the point about courage, I think, is really important, but I think it's courage on both sides, right? It's of course courage from leaders to give it away, but I also think it's courage for employees to trust that nothing bad happens when I take power, right? Yeah. So you got to see and repeatedly believe, that actually something positive comes out of this when I take initiative, when I take charge, when I maybe even do something that goes against my leader, because I think there will be better outcome and I'm willing to explain it, right? So I think that takes courage on both sides. But I also think that the benefits of doing that, like distributing the power, and the benefits of having that courage are so massive, right? Like everything I talk to Fortune 500 about today, when I sit down with these leaders, there's just one thing they want to talk about, and that is, how can we be more agile, right? Like the world is changing so rapidly right now, and to transform your organizations and to react to all of this stuff happening, if you have a model that's very top-heavy, hierarchy, all decisions has to pass through many layers, you're simply not equipped to react to the world. So I actually think we talk about software-based agility, of course, but I think this is cultural agility too. So I honestly don't believe you can survive, the next 5-10 years as a company if you don't embrace that. And I think the only way to get cultural agility is to trust.
Yeah, and that, again, not blind trust.
No.
You can look for where can I put some decision making out in the system, and then you also need to give access to information. So it's a lot about that. But I think this really taps well into this Davos conference headline of responsive and responsible leadership, because it's not, responsibility is about, of course, being responsible for what you do every day and taking charge of that. But responsiveness, that's very much into the agility part, where you actually, so it's no longer about being effective. It's about being responsive, being able to react in the moment. And that requires a certain kind of leader and a certain kind of employee, where you can actually respond in the moment to what's happening instead of waiting for, signals from above to tell you what to do. It's a completely different model.
Absolutely. And I think you took it right where I wanted to go.
Yeah, thank
Obviously,
you.
we're here at the World Economic Forum. The theme is responsive and responsible leadership. What are the top takeaways here for global business leaders that they could actually take back to their organizations and put into practice today?
Yeah, so they need to be aware that to be responsive, you need to build another organizational structure, and then you need to train people to actually be able to react in the moment to what's happening. And that's going to take some effort and some training. It's not just something that happens overnight. It's you're replacing an old-fashioned system that's been working for more than 200 years, a managerial system where you have the hierarchy, and it's very, very effective. And it's people feel afraid when you take that away and replace it with something else, which is much more fluid, and you cannot really see what's happening over there, and until you see the result, which is often better. But it takes some courage and some new way of looking at it, and that's what's needed.
Same question to you, Christian.
I think it's first off, it's a great topic, and I think again, given all of the disruption we're seeing in the world today, I mean, we just talk about Friday, it's the inauguration of a new president in the US, etc. It's obviously very clear that this topic is more important than ever. And I think responsible leadership, to me, is not just about being more cautious or thinking about your actions. It's actually also being bold and daring to take the decisions that we need to take to get to the next place, to move on. And I think right now, there's a lot of fear and people are pulling back everywhere from making the hard decisions. And to me, to be a responsible leader is actually daring to take those hard decisions, to be bold and to believe. We were sitting here with NASA's chief scientist, and she was saying the next job for NASA is going to be bold and to go explore where you've never been before. And I think that's a really great metaphor, not just for NASA, but for all of the governments, for all of the leaders right now. And that's the only way to be responsive, because the reason there is frustration, the reason there is a lot of anger out there, quite frankly, is because they're not seeing leaders being bold. They're not seeing leaders implement solutions or do the hard stuff of actually getting the compromises to do stuff. So I think it's more important than ever. It goes for government, it goes for policy, it goes for companies. And I think if you don't empower people, your organization, and create an atmosphere of trust, it's the same thing that we see in politics right now, then we're in severe trouble.
And I think you touched on something before about how important it is for you as a leader to actually step in and tell people, you can give me feedback. So talking about responsibility and responsiveness and building up a structure around that, and this year's theme is, so one concrete step a leader could take is to ask for feedback. Give me some feedback. How did that go? And then when people say awesome, because they will, because you're the CEO, you say what was awesome about it. So you don't just take for granted they'll give you the critical feedback, and because they won't. And then if it's critical, make it constructive and ask them, what could I do better next time? So really be open and honest about that as a leader.
And probably not do it on Twitter, speaking of politics.
Nope.
Well, I want to thank you both for coming in today to the Tradeshift Sanctuary. You heard it here first. Responsive and responsible leadership is about being bold, building trust, and being open to feedback. We have a whole week's worth of programming here at the Tradeshift Sanctuary during the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. And I thank you for joining us. And thank you both again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charles.
Yeah.